They beat a canine nearly to death, laughing as they left him to die. But when the dog crawled back home, they unknowingly awakened the man who trained them all, and who never forgives betrayal. The engines rolled in like thunder, low and mean, chewing up the road with a sound that made windows rattle in their frames. 9 of them, maybe 10. Black bikes with red patches, chrome teeth, and steel growls. They didn't belong to this town. No one did, not really. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions and hoped nothing noticed it long enough to answer. But the gang wasn't here for questions. They were here to be seen. At the edge of the town square, just past the faded mural of a forgotten war, the dog sat, alone, still, not sleeping, watching. Fur matted with dirt, a faint limp in his posture, a long scar running from jaw to shoulder, like someone had tried to carve silence into him. He didn't flinch when they approached, didn't move when the first rider pointed, just held his ground, eyes low but locked. "What's with the mud?" someone asked. "Guard dog maybe," another said, "or just a rat with good posture." They laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't come from humor, just ego stretched too tight over ignorance. One of them, the youngest, Slim they called him, revved his engine and rolled closer. The dog didn't move, not a twitch, just those eyes, holding. Slim kicked gravel at him. Still, nothing. Then he dismounted. "What, you deaf?" he said. "You ain't got no master, huh? No one told you to get lost." The others circled, boots hitting pavement, the sound of leather and metal tightening the air. The dog finally blinked, slow, not afraid, just tired. A wind passed through, gentle, like the land itself tried to warn them. They didn't listen. The first boot hit his side hard enough to lift him off the ground. A sharp yelp cracked the silence. Another kick, then another. The gang surrounded him like a game, the kind of violence that's easy when you think no one's watching, when you think it doesn't matter. One blow landed against the ribs and something cracked. The dog didn't cry out again, just rolled once, then went still. Eyes half closed, breathing shallow. Not dead, but close enough for them to feel victorious. "That'll teach stray mutts to stare," Slim muttered, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers. Not from fear, from adrenaline he didn't earn. They walked back to their bikes, still laughing, as if they'd proven something. None of them noticed the tag hanging from the dog's collar. Faded, bent, still etched with a name they should have remembered. One that had once meant leadership, discipline, fear. They left him there, broken in the dirt, half-shadowed under the dying sun, and they rode off thinking they'd made a statement. But they hadn't made a statement. They'd made a mistake, and mistakes like that don't echo. They hunt. The gravel bit into his belly with every inch he dragged forward. One paw at a time, ribs trembling, vision blurred with dust and blood. Breathing came in short, broken stutters, wet and wrong. But he didn't stop. Couldn't. Something deeper than pain pulled him. Not survival, instinct. Not to escape, but to return. He didn't know why, only that he had to. The sky above him cracked open without warning. First a whisper, then a growl. Then the rain came, cold, relentless. It soaked the dirt beneath him, turned the gravel to mud. Each crawl left streaks of blood behind, long, uneven smears of defiance. He moved like something that refused to die out of spite. A bird shrieked in the trees above and flew. Something in the forest paused. The rain masked scent, muffled sound, but the air shifted. Every so often he froze, ears twitching, body shuddering with effort. Then forward again, paw, elbow, the crawl of a soldier past his last fight. But his eyes, those eyes, never lost focus. Miles away, Malik Reeves stood still in his cabin, hand resting on the windowsill, eyes locked on nothing. The axe leaned against the wall. The kettle boiled behind him, untouched. A sound passed through him, not out loud, not something you hear, but something felt in the marrow. His chest tightened, not pain, not fear, something older, something ancient. As if a string buried deep in the forest had been tugged, and only one man felt it snap. The dog crawled through a narrow creek bed, water rising with the storm. The current pulled at his legs, tried to drag him back. He fought harder, clawed through it, collapsed on the other side in the thick brush, gasping for air that didn't seem to help. He laid there for a long while, long enough for the forest to fall quiet around him, long enough for the rain to wash the blood from his face, but not long enough to stop him. He rose again, just enough to move. The path wasn't visible, but he knew it, somewhere in his bones, somewhere older than commands or commands, forgotten. The path didn't need signs. It was written into the way he moved. The cabin wasn't far now. Malik stepped onto his porch without knowing why. Rain soaked through his flannel shirt. He didn't notice. He stood there unmoving, staring into the trees like they were about to confess something. Then he heard it.
A dragging sound. Faint, wet, slow, and when his eyes caught the movement, breath left him. The dog stumbled into view like a ghost returned from war, head low, fur soaked, body torn but not broken. Malik didn't speak. He didn't have to, because something old had just come home, and something older had just awakened. The axe came down clean, the wood splitting with a dull crack that echoed into the trees. Malik Reeve didn't grunt, didn't flinch. His motions were practiced, methodical. One log, two pieces, again, again. He didn't swing like a man burning energy. He swung like a man keeping a rhythm alive. No noise but the breath of pine, the groan of old timber, and the whisper of steel biting into bark. The cabin sat at the edge of nowhere, half swallowed by forest, wrapped in moss and silence. A dirt trail led to it, but no one used it. Malik hadn't seen another soul in nearly a year, not since he made sure the kind of people who might come looking knew better than to try. He'd spent 8 years off-grid, not hiding, just forgotten. The kind of forgotten that's earned, the kind you fight to keep. He wiped the blade clean, propped it against the chopping stump, and turned toward the porch. That's when he saw it. A trail, thin, red, winding up the steps in a line like a signature scrawled by pain. His eyes narrowed. Every muscle in his body went still. Blood, not old, not dry, fresh. He moved toward the door slowly, not out of fear, but calculation. The air had shifted. The forest was watching again, the kind of hush that only comes when something unnatural enters a place of peace. And then he saw him. A shape slumped at the base of the steps, wet fur, ragged breath. One leg curled unnaturally beneath him, scarred muzzle turned upward, eyes barely open but locked on the only man they knew. The dog collapsed fully. Malik froze. His throat tightened, not from shock, but from something worse. Recognition. A memory he'd buried so deep he wasn't sure it had survived. But it had. And now, it lay bleeding on his porch. He dropped to one knee, fingers hovering just above the fur. Sable. The name came out as air, not sound. The dog blinked once. That was all. Malik didn't ask questions, didn't panic. He moved. Fast. Smooth. Carried the dog inside like a man carrying a part of himself that had been ripped away and returned without warning. Inside the cabin, he cleared the table with one swipe. Blankets, tools, supplies. Years of order pushed aside in an instant. Sable's body hit the wood with a wet thud, and Malik's hands were already at work. Knife, tweezers, gauze, stitching thread, not hesitation, execution. Blood soaked into the grain. Malik didn't look away, but his eyes had changed. Something had entered them, something not seen in years. Not rage, not sorrow, purpose. The past didn't knock on his door, it crawled to it, bleeding, and now it was inside. That meant the quiet was over. The smell of cordite and wet soil filled the air like a second skin. Helicopters thumped low in the distance, barely audible over the chaos. Smoke curled through the shattered tree line, and the sharp bark of gunfire echoed from the ridge. Malik moved low through the mud, rifle in one hand, the leash in the other. Sable didn't pull. He didn't need to be told. He moved with him, shoulder to shoulder, breathing in rhythm. They were one. Not pet and owner, not even soldier and tool. Bonded. Sable was different from the others. Not because of his strength or speed, though he had both in terrifying abundance, but because of how he thought. He didn't chase. He hunted. Not like an animal, but like something older. Something designed to terrify without sound. His eyes never blinked at blood. His body didn't flinch under fire. He could clear a room without a bark, disappear into smoke like a ghost with teeth. Malik had trained others, dozens, but none like Sable. There was a moment once, during the Venezuela op. Malik was cut off, surrounded. Bleeding out behind a broken van door, 3 tangos closing in fast. No cover, no angle, just breath and fate. And then Sable came. No command, no hesitation. 3 bodies hit the ground within 4 seconds. No gunshots, no scream. When Malik staggered to his feet, Sable stood guard over him, chest heaving, jaws red. He never looked away. Back in the present, Malik pulled the needle through flesh, slow and clean. No anesthesia, no distraction, just pressure, not pressure, not. His hands didn't shake. They never had, even when everything else broke. Sable's eyes followed him with every pass. He didn't whine, didn't twitch. He just watched. That was always the deal. You don't panic, you don't beg, you trust. Malik cleaned the wounds with warm water, the basin already stained pink. Flank, neck, ribs, 2 at least were cracked. 1 back paw was torn to the bone. Bite marks, too. Boots couldn't leave those. Other dogs. The gang wasn't just cruel. They were calculating. They wanted him to hurt. That changed things. Malik stood slowly, rinsed the blood from his hands in silence. The fire crackled in the corner, casting long shadows across the cabin. Tools lined the walls, maps in drawers, shelves of gear no one had seen in a decade. He looked at Sable. Something passed between them. Not just pain, permission. The leash still hung by the door. Worn, frayed. It hadn't been touched in years, but it wasn't forgotten. Malik reached for it without looking, because the past wasn't whispering anymore. It was roaring. Morning broke without sunlight, just a gray, colorless haze seeping through the treetops, thick and heavy, like the sky hadn't decided yet whether to rain or fall. Malik sat at the table, eyes red from a night without rest, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. The fire still burned low in the hearth, but the warmth hadn't reached him. Not really. Sable lay near the stove, body bandaged, breath slow but steady. His ears twitched every few minutes, but his eyes remained closed. Not sleep, something deeper. Recovery that came from memory as much as rest. Even injured, the dog's presence filled the room like an unsaid warning. Malik set the mug down, leaned forward, and reached slowly for the collar. His fingers brushed over the leather, torn, soaked, nearly unrecognizable. And that's when he felt it. Something wedged between the inner lining and the buckle. He tugged it free. A scrap of dark leather, soaked but intact. The edges were torn, one side burned, but the image stamped into it still held. A vulture's skull with steel wings, black stitching, jagged red outline, steel vultures. Malik's thumb pressed against the patch like it could bleed truth. It wasn't nostalgia, it was proof. But there was more. Faint, almost missed. On the back, in faded black ink, smeared and half erased by blood and water, were 3 words: "He dies next." The writing was rushed, but familiar, crude, childish, slim. He didn't need a signature. That kid always wrote in violence, like it was permanent ink. Malik leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. Not anger, not even surprise, just the feeling of something sliding back into place. Like a lock turning, like a switch being flipped after too long in the dark. He hadn't spoken their names aloud in years, hadn't thought about the colors, the patches, the hierarchy. That world had been burned down when he left it. He made sure of it. But the ashes had decided to grow teeth. Steel vultures used to mean something. Code, order, brotherhood, even if it came blood-stained and jagged. But when Malik disappeared, the vultures didn't die. They mutated. He turned the patch over again, let the words sink in. He dies next. It wasn't a threat. It was a message left for the wrong man. Because Sable wasn't just a target. He was bait. Malik stood and walked to the gear locker, opened it for the first time in nearly a decade. Dust lifted into the air like it recognized him. He pulled out the jacket, black leather, weather-worn, his own insignia still stitched over the heart. But he didn't look at the patch. He looked at the blade hanging beside it. Then at Sable. "You're still breathing," he said softly. "That's their mistake." He folded the patch and slid it into his pocket. The past just signed its name again. Now it was his turn. The map unfolded like an autopsy. Lines drawn in thick marker. Circles. Notes. Years of growth built on a skeleton Malik had laid down with sweat and blood. Territory expanded far past what he ever allowed. Old safe houses repurposed for smuggling. Towns once protected now turned into toll gates for fear. And in the center of it all, a name that never belonged to them. Steel vultures. They hadn't earned it. They just wore it louder. Malik sat at the workbench, the room around him humming with ghosts. Tools scattered across the surface. Burn phones. A hard drive pulled from a storage can buried under the porch. He powered it up and watched the screen flicker to life. Old files loading like scars resurfacing. Photos, videos, news clippings. Surveillance pulled from the network he never really dismantled, only buried deep enough that it wouldn't breathe until he called it. He clicked through images, faces, some he recognized, some he'd tried to forget. There was Gunner, now a captain, once a loyal scout with a stutter and something to prove. Marlowe, who used to ride tail in silence, now fronting as enforcer, jaw clenched like he forgot how to speak without threat. And Slim, reckless, mean, stupid, in the most dangerous way. No backbone, just a mouthful of gasoline waiting for flame. But at the center, at the top, was Rook, the boy he should have buried when he had the chance. Rook had once cleaned Malik's boots without being asked, watched every move he made like gospel, called him mentor, brother, father even. But power's a funny thing. It doesn't whisper, it rots. And when Malik stepped down, quietly, purposefully, Rook didn't mourn the vacancy. He rushed to fill it, and he didn't care how. The photo showed him now, broad, leather-clad, bearded, jaw squared like he'd earned that weight, red bandana around his wrist, Malik's old signal for truce, now worn like a trophy. He didn't just lead the gang. He branded it, but you could see the lie in his eyes, that flicker of borrowed menace, the kind you put on like a jacket that doesn't quite fit. He barked loud because he hadn't been forged in silence, hadn't learned what real fear feels like until it stares back without blinking. Malik leaned closer to the screen, watching Rook in a video clip, slamming a prospect against a wall, laughing, bragging, barking orders, imitating. That's all he'd ever done. They weren't steel vultures anymore. They were dead men's sons playing king with bones they didn't earn. Malik closed the laptop. The rain had started again, soft at first, then harder. The forest outside hissed with it. Sable stirred by the fire, eyes opening, watching him. Malik stood slowly. He didn't need to say it, because the names weren't just familiar. They were personal, and now they were marked. The motel room stank of cheap liquor, old leather, and half-fried meat from a drive-through bag that hadn't made it to the trash. Twitch lay half on, half off the bed, boots still on, one arm dangling over the edge like he'd been poured there. The TV played static. The light in the bathroom buzzed, but didn't blink. He'd passed out somewhere around 3, too drunk to dream, too dumb to lock the door. At 7:06 a.m., he opened one eye. Something felt off. The kind of quiet that doesn't belong to mornings. He sat up slowly, groaning, his back popping like a rusted hinge. The mirror across the room caught his eye. Something was taped to it. He blinked again. Not a flyer, not a note. A photo. He stood too fast, his stomach twisted. He grabbed the table to steady himself and walked over barefoot, broken glass crunching under his heel. When he reached the mirror, the breath went out of his lungs. It was a picture. A dog. Mangled, bleeding, soaked in mud, but not dead. One eye open, teeth bared, defiant, and beneath the blood, you could just make out the collar and the scar. Sable. Twitch's hand went cold. He remembered the road, the circle of laughter, Slim's boot landing again and again. He hadn't touched the dog himself, but he'd been there. He'd watched, smiled even, didn't stop it. And now the dog was looking back at him, alive. He spun around, room empty, window locked, door still bolted from the inside. No sign of anyone. But the photo hadn't taped itself there. Someone had been in the room while he slept. He stumbled back, breath catching in his throat, grabbed his phone. No signal. Motel was too far out. Cheap reception, the kind of place meant to be forgotten. He pulled on his vest with shaking fingers and bolted outside, keys already in hand. The sun was barely up. Fog clung low across the parking lot. His bike was parked where he left it. Shining, waiting. He stepped toward it, boots slapping against the wet pavement. His fingers reached for the ignition, and the bike exploded. Not a fireball, not cinematic, just a deep, sharp boom, followed by shrapnel and smoke. The force knocked him clean off his feet. He hit the ground hard, back slamming against the curb, ears ringing, skin burning. He wasn't dead, but he'd never ride that bike again. He lay there gasping, lungs clawing at the air, blood in his mouth from a bite he didn't feel. Somewhere behind the pain, he understood something simple. This wasn't retaliation. It was a whisper. A pulse of warning sent through the skin, not the skull. Someone had let him live, not out of mercy, but message. And the message was clear. He's coming. The clubhouse buzzed with voices that didn't know how to be quiet. Bottles clinked, music leaked from the broken jukebox in the corner, and the smell of sweat, oil, and smoke thickened the air like fog that couldn't leave. Most of the gang was there, spread across booths and bar stools, pretending the edges of their world weren't starting to crack. Twitch sat hunched at the bar, arms wrapped around himself like warmth might come if he just held on tight enough. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot, and the skin on his hands was still red from the heat of the explosion. He hadn't spoken since he got there,
Just drank. Rook slammed a fist on the counter, laughing hard enough to make the others join in, even if their smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Are you serious?" he barked. "A photo and a firecracker and you're shaking like a leaf? Come on, Twitch. You passed out in a rat motel and woke up with bad luck. That ain't a ghost story. It's Tuesday." A few of the others chuckled, not loud, not confident, just enough to keep the mood from turning. Marlowe grinned, but his fingers drummed too fast on the table. Slim made a joke about dogs crawling out of graves, but nobody bit. Twitch finally looked up. It was him, man. Rook's smile faltered for a split second. Then he poured another shot and pushed it across the bar. "That him doesn't exist anymore," he said. "He left 8 years ago. You know why? Because he got soft, tired, turned his back on the Brotherhood. I am the Steel Vultures now, not him. And if he's still alive, he ain't stupid enough to crawl back here." Twitch didn't answer, just downed the shot and stared at the table like it might split open. Rook stood and paced to the middle of the room, arms wide. "This club ain't afraid of ghosts. We bury 'em." The room murmured agreement, thin, forced. Everyone knew Rook was talking to himself as much as them. Later that night, the clubhouse emptied out. Rook sat in his private office, lights low, door locked. A half-smoked cigar sat dead in the ashtray. His eyes flicked between the security feed and the old photo on the desk. It was the original crew, back when Malik stood in the middle. Calm, cold, respected in that quiet, bone-deep way no one could fake. Rook snorted, shoved the photo in a drawer. "Old man ghost stories," he muttered. Still, when he stood to leave, he reached for the gun on the shelf. Check the chamber. Full mag. Safety off. He carried it to the bathroom, carried it to bed, set it on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling until dawn scraped against the windows. Because deep down, below the swagger, below the denial, Rook felt what they all did. The shadow was back, and it wasn't here to talk. The road stretched like a scar through the desert, long, flat, lifeless. No towns, no signs, just rusted fence posts and dry wind pushing sand over asphalt that hadn't seen a patrol in years. Malik drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the worn leather notebook that lay open in the passenger seat. Inside, pages of scribbled names, coordinates, and dates, some crossed out, some circled. The kind of list that doesn't belong in the world unless something's gone terribly wrong. He pulled off the road near mile marker 312. No signage, no lights. Just a leaning shack with 2 busted gas pumps and a flickering closed sign that had been lying for at least a decade. The place looked like it was waiting to die. Malik parked, shut the engine off, and stepped out. The sun hit hard. No breeze, no sound but the creak of his boots on sand-dusted concrete. He walked to the door and knocked once, then waited. Nothing. He knocked again, slower. From inside, a shadow moved, then a face. The door opened a crack. Eyes squinted through it. Old, yellowed, wired for paranoia. Then they widened. "You." Malik didn't smile, didn't blink. The man behind the door stepped back, reached for something under the counter, then stopped. "I hoped you were dead," he said. Malik walked in without being invited. The bell above the door didn't ring. It had died long ago. The store was cluttered with dust and decay, shelves lined with expired cans. A fan turned lazily above, not to cool, just to prove it could. Malik made his way to the counter, pulled the map from his jacket and spread it out. A wave of sand drifted off the folds like it had clung to the paper out of loyalty. The man behind the counter, Charlie,
stood still. His hair was thinner now, his beard more gray than black, but his eyes were just as sharp. "You lighting this fuse again?" he asked. Malik didn't answer, just tapped 4 spots on the map. One in New Mexico, one near the Nevada line, one deep in the forest of Central Oregon, and the last, an old airstrip outside Houston, marked with a faded red X. Charlie looked down at the marks, then up at Malik. Half these people went ghost. Malik slid a flash drive across the counter. "They're listening now." Charlie didn't touch it. "You were the firewall, Malik. When you walked out, it all unraveled." Malik finally spoke. "It's unraveling again." Charlie's jaw tightened. He looked at the door, then locked it. He walked into the back room, returned with a burner phone wrapped in duct tape and silence. "I'll make the call," he said. "But if you're wrong..." Malik folded the map and slid it back into his coat. "I'm not." Outside, the wind had picked up. The desert held its breath. And somewhere far away, the network blinked back to life, quiet, buried, and waiting for orders. There was a time when the name Steel Vultures meant something other than chaos. Before the drugs, before the rackets, before the nights that ended in fire. Back when the colors weren't worn to threaten, but to warn. Not every man deserved the patch. You earned it by holding the line, by living under rules that didn't change just because the world did. Back then, Malik didn't sit in shadows. He sat at the center, not loud, not drunk on power like the new blood. He didn't bark orders or beat his chest. He led like a loaded weapon, still until necessary, then absolute. The original crew called themselves enforcers of the Forgotten Code. No exploitation, no civilians, no pointless bloodshed. If they rolled into town, it wasn't to shake it down, it was to make sure no one else could. Violence was currency, but it was spent carefully. They were a line in the dirt the truly dangerous didn't dare cross, and Malik drew that line. He remembered the old runs through Arizona, quiet towns where the patch meant protection, where single mothers could sleep and local shops didn't fear who walked in after sundown. He remembered bartering repairs for food, pulling outsiders off drug corners, reminding predators that there were consequences even when the law turned away. That version of the vultures wasn't clean, but they were fair. Then came Rook. The kid was eager, too eager, always watching, always nodding, always asking just enough questions to make it seem like respect. Malik took him in after his brother died in a raid, gave him a vest that didn't quite fit, and told him to earn it. He did. For a while. Rook rode hard, fought harder, but beneath all that muscle was a hunger Malik misjudged. Not for belonging, for control. He wanted the patch not because of what it stood for, but for what it could get him. The name, the fear, the firepower. He didn't want the burden, just the brand. And when Malik started pulling back, tightening borders, refusing dirty money, stepping away from extortion, Rook whispered, to the young ones, the angry ones, the ones who'd never known what it was to lead without poison in their blood. It didn't take long. Malik left quietly, didn't force a fight, didn't make a speech. He saw what was coming, knew he couldn't stop it. He just walked away, watched them rot from a distance. Now, years later, the roads he once ruled were bleeding under the weight of Rook's legacy. The steel vultures had become parasites, drunk on their own echo. No more code, no more balance. Just threats, drugs, and chaos, wrapped in a patch they no longer deserved. Malik stood outside his cabin, staring at the trail that led back to the highway. Sable lay by the steps, his breathing steadier now, watching him. Malik didn't speak, because he knew what came next. You don't reclaim honor through words. You rip it out of the hands that defiled it. The sound was faint at first, soft claws clicking against the cabin's wooden floor. slow, deliberate. Malik didn't turn. He was at the counter, grinding steel against stone, drawing sparks in steady rhythms like a song he hadn't played in years. Blade, pressure, pull, the hiss of metal remembering its edge. Sable limped across the room, each step cautious but not hesitant. His gait was uneven, but his spine was straight, his head low, ears forward, eyes sharp. The bandages still clung to his ribs, stained dark in places, but he moved like something that had made peace with pain. The dog stopped by the window, nose lifted to the air. He sniffed once, then turned toward the door and sat. His chest rose and fell with deep, controlled breaths. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He was waiting. Malik placed the finished blade on the table beside the others. 3 knives, 1 hatchet, a folding karambit he hadn't touched since before the fall, each cleaned, oiled, honed to something silent and hungry. He glanced at Sable. "You remember how to track?" Sable blinked. Malik slid one of the knives into a sheath, strapped it to his side, and began wrapping tape around the grip of another. Every motion was calm, no fury in his hands, just purpose, just return. "This place taught you silence," he said. "Taught you patience. Taught you how to wait without forgetting who you are." Sable stood, walked to the door, and sat again, closer now. His tail didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the wood like he could already see the road beyond it. Malik crouched beside him and brushed a hand over the dog's head. The scar behind Sable's ear twitched under his palm. "They wanted fear," he said quietly. His voice didn't rise. "If that's what they came for." He looked up, eyes hard. "They'll taste it now." Outside, the forest swayed beneath the weight of coming dusk. The wind picked up, not sharp, but steady. Branches creaked in slow warning. Malik opened the chest by the door, pulled out the jacket, the original one. Black leather cracked from time, his old patch still stitched in place, faded but unburned. Above it, the words, "Order before all." He slipped it on, then reached for the old revolver hidden beneath the floorboards. Checked the cylinder, fully loaded. He set it beside the blades. Sable sniffed the air again, then growled low, not from threat, from memory. Malik grabbed the leash, held it loose, but he didn't clip it on. He opened the door instead, and the dog stepped out, slow and limping, but straight-backed, like a shadow with a heartbeat, the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself. It's just there. Malik followed, locking the door behind them, not to protect what was inside, but to seal what was about to be unleashed. It started with a whisper, a quiet word between 2 patched members in a back alley after a supply drop, eyes darting, voices low, nerves tight. Then it spread to a phone call that never should have been made, a burner that rang at the wrong hour, and a meeting that ended with no one speaking above a whisper. The steel vultures were cracking, and not from the outside in, from within. Rook didn't see it at first. He saw the empty chairs and chalked it up to fear. Weak blood. Men spooked by a dog story and a few smoke bombs. He doubled down, demanded loyalty, held louder meetings, pushed more weight, more deals, tried to fill the silence with motion, but the silence didn't go away, because Malik wasn't lighting fires. He was pulling wires. One by one, their connections began to vanish. Gun shipments rerouted, money drops missed, codebooks exposed, blackmail photos mailed to the wrong hands. The crew's untouchable shell began to buckle, not from gunshots, but from truth. At first, Rook blamed outsiders, cartels, cops, rivals, until a file landed on his desk, thick, clean, dated. Every move they'd made for the last 3 years, every deal, every misstep, names, times.
Coordinates. It wasn't a threat, it was a confession. Not theirs, Malik's. Proof that he'd been watching, recording, waiting. And now he was letting the empire expose itself. No blood, no explosions, just rot surfacing. Gunnar was the first to leave. Packed up in the night, didn't say a word. His cut left on the bar like a tombstone. Then Marlowe disappeared, after getting a photo of his daughter walking home from school. No message, no warning, just the image. They weren't scared of dying. They were scared of being seen. Because Malik wasn't coming at them like a rival. He was pulling the truth out of their shadows and letting it scream. By the time Rook called an emergency sit-down, half the room was gone. Those who remained kept their hands close, their eyes down. The only sound was the hum of a broken light above the table and the slow ticking of a clock that had been stuck at 3:16 since the day Malik left. "This ain't war," Rook growled. "This is theater." But even he didn't believe it anymore, because somewhere deep in his gut, he felt it. The pressure, the noose tightening. And the worst part? No one had fired a shot, because Malik didn't need bullets. He just needed silence, and silence was starting to scream. The clubhouse sat heavy under the weight of quiet, not the kind earned by peace, but the kind that crept in when men stopped trusting the room around them. Dust floated through the shaft of light, spilling from a busted window. The air stank of stale beer and old smoke, but beneath it, something new lingered. Caution. The kind that made shoulders stiffen and backs straighten without reason. The table was already set when they found it. No one saw who came in. No one heard a door open or close. The cameras had gone black hours before. Feeds cut clean. No glitches, no trails. Just silence where surveillance used to breathe. And on the center of the table, beneath the old clubhouse light that flickered like a dying heartbeat, was a single item. Malik's VP patch. The original one. Scorched at the edges, stitching frayed. The black leather aged and warped from time, but the symbol still clear. Steel wings, bleeding sky, and beneath it, on a scrap of torn notebook paper, was a single word written in black marker. Wrong. No name, no date, no signature, but the room knew. They all knew. Rook arrived seconds later, boots stomping across the floor like denial might follow them. He froze when he saw it. His jaw locked, eyes wide, just for a breath, before he masked it with a laugh that didn't sound like anything human. "Cute," he muttered. "Old man wants to play games." But nobody laughed with him. Not this time. Marlowe didn't meet his eyes. Gunnar's empty seat stayed empty. Slim leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, sweating despite the cold. Rook looked around the room, then slammed his fist on the table. "He's baiting us," he snapped, "trying to make us flinch. You all gonna flinch? You gonna run like the rest? He leaves a patch, and you act like he walked in here with a bomb?" No one answered, so Rook drew his gun and fired once, straight through the middle of the patch. The shot echoed like it was meant to shake resolve, but the only thing it did was make people blink. He looked at them, eyes wild. "War," he growled. "We're taking it to him." Still no answer. He stepped closer to the circle. "I said war." Finally, Slim spoke. Quiet, flat. "With who?" Rook stared at him. "With him," he said. Slim didn't blink. "You sure you want to go looking for someone who's already here?" And that was it. The silence that followed was a verdict. No one moved. No one stood. Because they weren't refusing out of fear. They were refusing out of understanding. You don't start war with a ghost that already set the table. And when the table bears your sins, you don't fight back. You pray he's already full. The wind moved slow through the scrapyard, carrying the scent of rust, oil,
and forgotten metal. Rows of wrecked cars sat in silence, their skeletons stacked like tombstones. Somewhere between the crumpled hoods and shattered windshields, an old radio buzzed static from a broken cab. Half a song, barely a signal. A cigarette burned on the edge of a toolbox, smoke curling up into a sky that had no reason to care what was happening below. Slim had come here to hide. No patch, no bike, just a hoodie pulled tight and a pistol tucked close. The scrapyard belonged to a cousin of a friend. Off-grid, no questions. Just grease and ghosts. He'd been sleeping in the old office trailer, jumping at every sound, waking in cold sweats with a dog's eyes in his head. The laughter from that day, the day they beat the mutt, was gone now. All that remained was silence and something else. He stepped out of the trailer, gun in hand, scanning like a man already halfway to running. No one should have known he was here. But something felt off. The air, too still. He turned the corner between a stripped-out Mustang and a rusted Ford pickup, and froze. Sable stood 10 feet away, not moving, not growling, just standing, watching. Slim blinked, thinking it had to be a hallucination. No way that dog was still alive. Not after what they'd done. Not after the sound his ribs made under Rook's boot. But there he was, scar across the muzzle, limp still faint in the back leg, and those same cold, steady eyes. "Stay back," Slim said, voice cracked, raising the pistol. Sable didn't flinch, didn't blink. He took one step forward. Slim panicked. He turned and ran, sprinted between junkers and scrap piles, heart slamming in his chest like it was trying to flee before the rest of him. Metal scraped his shoulder. He stumbled, kept moving, vaulted over a half-gutted van, and landed hard at someone's feet. Boots, black, still. Slim looked up. Malik Reeve, face calm, eyes empty. A silence so heavy it collapsed every excuse Slim's brain tried to reach for. Malik stepped forward. No words, no warning. One hand closed around Slim's wrist, twisting until the gun clattered to the dirt, then a knee to the chest, fast, precise. The breath left Slim's lungs in a grunt that never fully formed. "You remember him?" Malik asked, voice low. Slim coughed, nodded, eyes wild. Malik glanced behind him. Sable walked into view. Closer now, his breathing even, his pace measured. He didn't attack. He just stood there, watching Slim the way ghosts watch the living. Malik leaned in close, breath steady. "You kicked something you didn't understand." Then the blade flashed. Not fatal, just enough to mark, to remind. Slim screamed as it tore across his shoulder. Malik stood over him as he writhed, bleeding into the gravel. "You got off easy," he whispered. He turned to Sable, who hadn't moved. "Let's go." And together, they vanished back into the scrapyard's shadows. No sirens, no witnesses, just the first drop of blood, and the beginning of something the rest wouldn't outrun. The bike roared to life with a sound that didn't just echo, it declared. Not flashy, not new, just power coiled in steel and memory. Malik sat still in the saddle, leather creaking as he leaned forward, gloved hands resting on the grips like he'd never left them. His breath moved in and out, calm, as the headlight cut through the night in a narrow, blinding beam. He didn't ride like a man returning. He rode like a judgment long delayed. Dust kicked up behind him as the wheels found their rhythm. The road ahead was blacktop broken by time, scattered with gravel and silence. He wore no colors, no insignia, just the old jacket, the one that used to command nations of men in places maps had stopped naming. His face was shadowed beneath a pulled-down cap. His eyes didn't blink. He passed no towns, no stations, just trees and wire fences and wind that refused to slow him down. Sable was not with him tonight. This was a different kind of mission. Not violence, Not retribution, delivery. In 4 cities, 4 men stirred. Each found the same thing waiting for them. A black envelope. Unmarked. No seal. Each placed in a location only they would check. Personal, hidden, private. Gunnar found his on the back seat of his pickup, locked in a garage with 3 padlocks. Marlowe's was slipped under the floorboard of his trailer, beneath a loose plank only he used. Rook's was hand-delivered. He found it on his nightstand, beside his loaded gun. Not one of them saw who left it. Inside each envelope, a set of coordinates. Nothing else. No threats, no demands, just a location. Remote, abandoned, familiar. The kind of place where real business used to happen. Where blood mixed with respect, where patches were earned, not bought. A stretch of dirt deep in the hills, far from police scanners and cell towers. The kind of place Malik had once chosen for meetings that never made records. The message was clear: come alone, or don't come at all. And each man, though they'd never say it, felt the same thing crawl up their spine when they held that paper. Not fear of death, fear of being known. Because it wasn't just that Malik had returned. It was how he'd returned. Silent, precise, surgical. He wasn't burning the empire, he was calling it home. To the place where it all began. And they knew, if they went, something would end. But if they didn't, something worse would begin. So they packed, checked weapons, didn't tell anyone, and rode out beneath a dying moon, all while Malik carved through the night ahead of them. A storm in leather, and silence in motion. The quarry was carved into the hillside like a wound the earth never healed. Cracked stone, old tire tracks, the rusted skeletons of machinery long forgotten. No lights, no cover. Just raw, open space, the kind where truth stands exposed, whether you want it to or not. The wind whistled through the narrow cuts in the rock, carrying dust and silence in equal measure. Malik stood in the center, no backup, no ambush, just a man in a black jacket and the dog beside him, scarred, limping, but poised like judgment wearing fur. Sable didn't growl, didn't bark, he just stood still. Eyes forward, ears twitching with every shift of the wind. The first bike arrived at 2:14 a.m., then a second, then a third, fourth, fifth. 5 riders, 5 engines, each man armed to the teeth, vests stiff with sweat and expectation. They dismounted slowly, forming a loose arc around the center of the pit. Flashlights flicked on, beams cut through the dust and found Malik already waiting. Alone, no weapons drawn, no fear. Rook stepped forward, helmet under one arm, eyes squinting under the brim of his hat. "You called this," he said. "So call it." Malik didn't speak. He just stared. The stillness stretched. Then Gunnar raised his rifle, tired of waiting. That's when it started. Sable moved first, silent, fast. Too fast for the limp to matter. He broke left, jaws flashing white in the darkness. Gunnar didn't have time to aim, just enough to scream. Then Malik was in motion, a blade in one hand, a short baton in the other. He crossed 10 feet in a heartbeat and struck Marlowe across the knee, hard, clean, calculated. The man dropped before he knew he'd been hit. Malik moved again. Not a fight, not a brawl, just precision, like a man dismantling something broken. Rook fired, missed, tried again, then screamed when Malik's boot slammed the pistol from his hand, sending it skittering across gravel. They grappled, fast and sharp. Rook all fury, Malik all control. It ended with Rook on his back, gasping, Malik's boot pressed to his throat. "I built you," Malik said, voice low. "You poisoned everything I left behind." Behind them, Slim ran, gun forgotten, blood on his face from where Sable had taken him down hard. Not killed, just humbled, just scarred. Malik didn't chase him. He looked at the men left crawling, breathless, broken. "You want to lead?" he said, scanning them. "You lead what's left." No one answered, because nothing was left. Not pride, not control, not myth, just the truth. They'd never been leaders. They'd been thieves of memory. And tonight, the quarry burned not with fire, but with the smoke of something ancient being made clean again. Malik turned, Sable at his side. No triumph in their walk, just silence, and the sound of men finally understanding who they'd tried to become and why they never could. The highway stretched through dust and neon, a blur of headlights and motel signs blinking like forgotten stars. Rook had made it 2 states out, riding hard and sleeping less. He changed bikes, burned his vest, paid cash for silence everywhere he went. But no matter how far he ran, the feeling never left, like something was just behind him, not chasing, not hunting, watching. He hadn't seen the others since the quarry, didn't call, didn't want to know. Whatever was left of the steel vultures wasn't worth saving. It had all turned to smoke in his hands, and in that smoke he saw the face of the man he once called mentor, the one he'd mocked, replaced, buried, and still hadn't outrun. Rook checked into a rundown roadside motel just before midnight. Nevada border, middle of nowhere, no cars in the lot, no clerk behind the counter, just a key on the desk and a flickering light overhead. Room 6, end of the row, no cameras, exactly what he wanted. He sat on the edge of the bed with a bottle in one hand and a gun in the other, not cleaning it, not aiming it, just holding it, like the metal might explain something he still didn't understand. How Malik had done it, how he'd taken everything without a single lie, without shouting, without war, how he made an entire empire vanish by showing it its reflection. Rook took a long drink and stood. He checked the window, nothing. Then the door. He opened it and froze. Sable stood there, still, silent, not barking, not growling, just there. Behind him, Malik stepped forward, leather jacket catching the motel's flickering light, boots quiet against the concrete. His face was calm, not angry, not smug, just finished. He didn't raise a weapon, didn't give a speech. He simply reached into his coat and held something out. Rook stared down at the object in Malik's hand. The patch, the one from Sable's collar. But it was different now, darker, wet, soaked through with something red that hadn't dried. Malik dropped it into Rook's palm. "You were never king," he said, voice like stone. Just the boy who thought power meant freedom. Rook opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because there was nothing left to say. Malik turned and walked away. Sable followed slow and steady. They didn't look back, didn't need to. The message had landed. Rook stood there alone, hand trembling around the blood-stained patch. The motel light buzzed above him, dim and dying. No bullets, no chains, no death. Just a truth so sharp it cut deeper than anything else ever could, and the knowledge that mercy had come, not as a gift, but as a sentence. The fire cracked low in the cabin, casting long shadows across the walls like they were remembering something. Malik knelt near the hearth, adding a fresh log, the flames licking up with quiet approval. No radio, no television, just the rhythm of wood settling into heat and the gentle exhale of a world returning to stillness. Sable lay nearby, stretched across the old rug, his breathing slow and deep. The scar along his side had healed into a raised line of history. His eyes were closed, but his ears still twitched with every shift in the wind, not from fear, from awareness. Outside, the trees whispered through each other, soft wind pushing through the branches like the forest was sighing in relief. No tires on gravel, no engines in the distance, no footsteps that didn't belong. The stillness wasn't emptiness, it was earned. Malik stood and moved to the far wall, an old plank of pine with nails bent from years of holding things that mattered. He held something wrapped in cloth. Slowly, he unwrapped it and pulled out a new plaque, carved by hand, the edges rough but deliberate. He held it in his calloused fingers for a long moment, reading the words again before hanging it above the door. You don't own what you abandon. He stepped back and looked at it. It wasn't a warning. It was a rule, the kind that didn't get broken twice. He poured a cup of black coffee and stepped out onto the porch, Sable trailing behind him, his limp barely visible now. The dog sat by the steps, head high, ears forward. The same position he'd taken that first night. Bleeding, broken, silent. Only now he was whole again. The sky stretched wide and gray above them. No storm, no sun, just air, just peace. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first noise, the kind that survives because someone chose to protect it with sharp edges. Malik sat on the porch rail sipping from the tin cup, eyes scanning the tree line. He wasn't looking for anything, just watching, just keeping. He didn't wear the jacket anymore. It hung inside now, back on its hook. Like a weapon cleaned and set aside, not forgotten, not forgiven. Just waiting, should the silence ever be challenged again. Sable shifted, let out a low breath, and rested his head on his paws. His eyes closed finally, without tension behind the lids. Malik took another sip. The war hadn't fixed the world, hadn't changed what men could become when they believed power was the same as legacy, but it had reminded them that some shadows don't stay buried, some dogs don't forget, and some men don't walk away because they're tired. They walk away because they're the only ones who know how to return when it matters. The fire inside flickered, the cabin breathed, and the quiet stayed, because Malik Reeve made sure it did.